Welcome everybody to Go Local Live. I'm Josh Fenton, CEO and co-founder. We've got an interesting show today. We've got the president of Rhode Island Energy, Greg Cornett, and we've got a lot of questions from Go Local readers and viewers who've come in through messaging and on Facebook to pose some questions to the president. Greg, thanks so much for joining us.
Glad to be here. Appreciate the opportunity to chat, Josh.
Great. You've been here in Rhode Island for about a year. With PPL, the parent company, for much longer, but your quick take on Rhode Island, then we'll jump into the questions.
Yeah, I've been here a little over a year, and of course, had the chance to be here before that with the various different aspects of my prior role. But it's a great state. Really enjoying being here. Obviously, we're in a challenging environment around energy prices right now, so that's kept me very, very busy. But I've really appreciated the chance to get around and to meet folks.
Great. So we got about, between posted to social media and then direct messages or emails that came in, we got about 50 or 60 questions. We've kind of merged some that were very similar together. Others were more distinct. I'm going to just go through them and give you an opportunity to respond to what Rhode Islanders are thinking. Obviously, you know, you're in the hotbed right now. A lot of emotion about the pricing of energy in Rhode Island. So let's go to it. First question, Paul Lombardi asked, do you pay for your electricity?
Yes, I absolutely do. So I understand. You know, listen, especially coming from a state like Kentucky, where rates are much lower, and we can talk about the dynamics there. I fully understand the challenges that folks have. My bills were much higher this winter as well.
Did you cringe when you opened yours like the rest of us did?
You know, I opened my first one when we moved up here, and we were in a series of short-term rentals for a while as we were trying to find a house. So my very first bill cycle in the house was in November, but that was also in a stage where we had still had some work being done and things being delivered and moved in, and a lot of windows open, a lot of doors open, but yeah, I opened it with bated breath, I guess.
Russ Herzian asked, Pasco Utility, it's now called, I think, Clear River Electricity, is 7 cents a kilowatt. You guys are 15 cents a kilowatt. Why?
Yeah, great question. The short answer is they're allowed to operate under state law under a very different set of procurement requirements and public policy requirements than is applicable to Rhode Island Energy, particularly the Act on Climate related obligations that we have. When the General Assembly passed that bill, years ago, they actually made the decision to exempt Pasco from those requirements. So they're able to buy a different mix of resources than we are. They don't have the same public policy costs that are passed through their bill directly passed through the bill that we have to pass on to our customers. And then, there are other factors, Josh. I mean, they're much smaller. They really only run a distribution system in a more rural part of the state, so they don't maintain a transmission system like we do, which is expensive. And generally speaking, when you're in more of an urban area, the cost to provide service there it can be higher than it is in a more rural area because just the infrastructure, a lot of it, if you think about downtown Providence, a lot of that's underground. So those are factors as well. But the big driver is they are not required to comply with a lot of the same mandates that we are.
All right. We'll come back to the issue of sort of those environmental mandates in a few minutes in one of the other questions. Alan G. and Francisco asked, what's your compensation?
Well, so I'm not going to get into my own compensation. I understand why that's a question, but I will say there's been a lot of discussion around the CEO compensation, and I guess
I believe we're the ones who wrote that story.
You were.
So let me just tell you, we write about
the CEO. Yeah. If I can say that, Josh, that salary is not mine. Mine is we're not in the same stratosphere.
Okay, and folks can go and look that up. I think we've written it the last 2 years, and we'll write it
Yeah,
again this year. I think coming up there will be a proxy statement by the
there will be.
company,
Yeah.
and we'll be able to delve into that. Debbie Smith asks, why is she not being paid as much by Rhode Island Energy for the energy her 39 solar panels generate as she did by National Grid?
There shouldn't be a difference there in terms of the rates. That rate structure has not changed. So, without seeing specifics of her bill, understanding usage and those kinds of things, I can't specifically answer her question. I would say to her, call our call center, 855-743-1101. Feel free to say that I said on GoLocal that she should call and ask, and we'll take a look at her account and make sure that she's getting the right amount of credits. But the amounts under those approved rate structures have not changed since we took over ownership. So I'm not sure what that variable might be, but we'll be glad to take a look at it for her.
All right, we'll make the connection here and make sure that she gets that
Sure,
information.
please. I can even give you a direct line.
Okay, Rose Broccoli Ritchie says her bills are just through the roof. She can't afford it. She has a disability. She's really has to look at putting solar on her own home, and she doesn't know if she can de facto afford it. What do you say to this? This is a theme that comes through over and over again. You saw the public hearing.
Yeah, I was there.
Dozens and dozens of people there, stayed there for hours.
Yeah.
Many of them moderate or poor, and really, de facto begging for relief.
Yeah.
Your thoughts and how this can be improved.
Yeah. I was there for that public hearing. I stayed the entire time. I was at the State House last week when a number of the bills were heard. I stayed the entire time. I've been to a number of other forums. It's really important to me to get out and to understand and to hear directly from our customers. Listen, I get why folks can be skeptical, but of me and of the company. But I would say the pain that customers are feeling is not lost on me or on us. It is some of these stories are really heart wrenching, and it's really difficult when we only control a third of the bill. What I would say to a customer and I apologize, I've already lost the name that you just gave me, but this lady,
Rose Broccoli Ritchie.
yeah, Rose, I would say a couple of things. One, please call us if you've got questions or concerns. We have a number of offerings that we provide to customers. And one of the really difficult things for me that I've realized in the year that I've been here is that a lot of customers don't take advantage of the offerings that we have. So
And
feel
when
free
you
to
say
call.
offerings,
Yeah,
give some examples, some
yeah,
specifics, and how it can reduce the cost. Let's
sure.
say my bill's $400 a month. I can't afford to pay it.
Yeah,
I don't have the money. My wife's out
yeah,
of work, and I'm working reduced hours at the company.
yeah. So, first and foremost, we're required to bill for services rendered. That's part of the regulatory regime under which we operate, and every utility across the country operates. So, but we do have certain um, uh, approved programs that we first and foremost we can put folks on a billing plan. I get that might not be optimal for everybody, but
Right.
it's not like if you can't pay your bill right now, we can help with putting you on a payment plan. We have arrearage management plans, depending on what an individual's situation is and whether they qualify for certain federal or state funding. LIHEAP programs, we can assist with that. We also have a low income rate, which is a significant discount for residential customers if they qualify. And then we have a lot of external resources that we're aware of or that we support. The Good Neighbor Energy Fund is one example. We're the biggest donor to that fund. It's run through the Metro or through United Way of Rhode Island, and we actually doubled our donation this year through our foundation. So that's, shareholder money that's going back to invest back into the local economy and to help customers, regardless of whether they're a Rhode Island Energy customer or a customer of another utility, or whether they use heat or propane or delivered fuel, wood for their heating. So we have a number of those offerings. We have budget billing, so things like that it just depends on the individual situation, Josh, and whether somebody qualifies for it. But please don't be sitting there suffering in silence. Reach out to us. We've got agents that are here in Rhode Island and ready to help wherever we can. And we'll work with our customers as fully as we can within the confines of what we're allowed to do under the law. We don't want anybody suffering, to the extent that we can do anything to help it.
Greg, answer me this. Under National Grid, the phone support system was up in upstate New York or someplace like that, and us New Englanders don't necessarily appreciate somebody from New York helping us. Goes back to Red Sox, Yankees, the sale of Babe Ruth or something like that. Is the phone support system now Rhode Islanders answering Rhode Islanders questions?
It is. We have overflow, to be clear. I always want to be precise and transparent. We have overflow. So in those instances where, for example, we have heavy call volume or storm situation is a good example.
Sure.
There could be calls that could be routed to one of our other centers in Kentucky or Pennsylvania, or in particular, we use an out-of-state firm to help with multilingual customers. So we have some of that capability in Rhode Island, but we set up our own call center here in Rhode Island that went live last year with, we have over a couple hundred agents. They're all local employees, and it's not staffed at a 200 level all the time because we don't need that, but rolling basis. It's actually up in Cumberland, so they're all local.
This is multiple people ask this, probably the single biggest question, and it really is sort of illogical, I think, for most of us. Why is our delivery costs higher than our usage costs? Here we are trying to cut back on our cost as individuals. We're turning down the thermometer. We're putting on the extra sweater. We put the coat on. We wrapped ourselves with every possible piece of clothing, and yet our fee, we're getting whacked.
Yeah. So you're hitting on a really important issue, and it's one that I've noticed. When we redesigned our bill back in the fall of last year, for the first time, we sort of broke out that pie chart. It was always broken out before, but we've got a visual now that has created a lot of questions from customers about supply and delivery. The supply is a direct pass through. That's just what we can buy the energy for, and it gets passed through dollar for dollar. There's no markup or anything on that. The delivery part is broken into really two discrete pieces, really three. There are two parts on there that we control. There's the distribution energy charge, and then related to that is the customer charge, and I can explain both of those. And then there's a transmission charge. So those three pieces are what we control, we being Rhode Island Energy. But there are a number of other costs on there, and they're tied to usage. Most of them, not all of them, but most of them are tied to usage. So they go up and down depending on how much a customer is using as well. But those are some of those, policy charges and taxes that I talked about earlier.
Let's jump in on those for a second. So, we'd had a conversation a month or so ago, and you raised the issue of and these are generally tied to environmental efforts to reduce the carbon footprint, to get off the dependency of those fuels that are going to adversely impact the environment, shift over to more solar, more green, more wind. And, I brought that, I think you left, I called the speaker, and he said, listen, based on their estimates at the State House, he said, that's 9%. That's not 100%, it's 9% of those costs. That was his pushback in the conversation with me. Talk about, even if we reduced that and eliminated those, which I don't think there's a public policy support for, and we could argue that, pay me now or pay me later, as we see the increased costs of insurance tied to storm damages, et cetera, that those are driving up the cost for homeowners and for renters. How do we balance these?
Yeah. That is the question, really, and I want to be really clear. I'm just pointing out, what the facts are on the bill and what the costs are. I'm not a policymaker.
Sure.
I'm not a politician. So, and I certainly agree and believe that these green energy programs and these public policy charges that customers see on their bill, absolutely there are broader societal, climate, environmental benefits from all of those. There are economic benefits from all of those. So I'm not here to tear those down or to say let's get rid of them. But I don't know exactly what numbers the speaker was looking at, because it very much varies depending on what type of customer.
Do you think
you're
it's
looking at.
what does Rhode Island Energy estimate that the cost of those green programs, the phase out of electricity over the next decade, roughly, et cetera?
So collectively, if you look at a typical residential bill, because utilities across the country, and when we try to talk about rates, we just sort of say we use this base benchmark of 500 kilowatt hours of usage for a typical residential customer. Some use more, some use less, obviously, and
Okay.
Commercial customers are different. So this winter, on a typical residential bill, those costs were about 14% of that typical bill, and then another 2% roughly for taxes that we have to collect and that go back to the state. So, those green programs, things like, and they're not all green. I mean, some of them are low income assistance as well. So that probably also accounts for some of the difference in what the speaker was looking at, because if you don't account for like the LIHEAP enhancement charge and some of those others, the the energy efficiency program is another one that helps.
So if you reduced all the state mandates de facto, you would drop costs by about 15%.
About 15-16%. So that on that average bill, or typical bill, I shouldn't say average, it would be about $26 to $28 for those public policy and low income assistance costs and taxes. So that's just one component of the overall bill, obviously. The biggest piece roughly the biggest piece, or about half, is supply, and then you've got the distribution energy charge and the transmission charge and customer charge that I mentioned earlier that we directly control.
Okay. Let me go to the next question, and this is a perplexing one to me. And I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I'm going to put you on the spot. Not that I haven't already put you on the spot, but we'll add some more on the spotness. Are you a donor to Dan McKee?
Am I a donor to Dan McKee? I don't believe I may have made a donation to the governor at this point. I honestly, I don't mean to be evasive. I don't think I have made a donation.
We'll look it up in the campaign finance. But
if I have,
but I will say this:
small.
When the governor Dan McKee was lieutenant governor, we would get calls from him on a regular basis as saying, "I want to come over on GoLocal Live, and I've got something to say about National Grid," and he was a fierce critic of the policies of National Grid. Now, as governor, and maybe this is some morphing of him, he was on, I don't know, a year or so ago, talking about the cost structure of the second phase of Ørsted's project, and complaining about what Ørsted had proposed. But let's just say he's not as vigilant. He's not vigilant at all. He seems to be quite mute on the issue of energy costs for the most part. And listen, I'm sure you don't need an extra critic in the State House, but I do think for many people who've sort of watched the machinations over the period of time, that's been a change in pattern by Governor McKee. Let me go to the next question. Ed Mendoza asks, how long until Rhode Island Energy implements a time of usage program, and with that, would it be required digital meters as well? And it was clear from the, I've restructured his question slightly, he's not a fan of this idea.
Okay. So we are actually in the initial phases of rolling out our automatic meter functionality, or smart meters, that we've started in the southern part of the state. That will continue through this year and into next. That was a program that was approved by the Public Utilities Commission in Rhode Island last year. So we've started in the south, and we'll work our way up in the north. And the first meters were set last week or 2 weeks ago, and are functioning well. So yes, that does require, or we are rolling out those new meters. They do not have. I know some customers. I heard some in the hearing a couple of weeks ago concerned about these meters potentially having lithium batteries in them. The meters we're using don't have batteries at all in them, so none of those concerns from that perspective. But so that will be the base by which we will ultimately be able to roll out time of use rates. We have to get the entire infrastructure deployed, and then we have to get the data gathered for all of that, and get the functionality in place to be able to do that. So that would then allow us to start rolling out time of use rates. But we're a few years out from that full deployment. It just takes time to get all of those meters set and to get the full functionality in place.
And what's the benefit?
Yeah, so a couple things. One, the immediate benefit is it allows us, once that meter is set and starts sending us signals, we can get real-time data on usage, and customers can start getting real-time data on usage in short increments. So we will be able to have a lot more information that we can share with customers. They'll be able to have more information. Importantly, if you got an outage at your home, we'll immediately know it, as opposed to waiting for you to call. If you need to have your service disconnected for some reason, if you're having work done at your home or whatever, we can do that remotely, and then restart the service remotely, as opposed to rolling a truck, which will ultimately allow us to save money as well. And then finally, once we get that full deployment and can offer time of use rates for a variety of programs. Just one example would be, let's say you have an electric vehicle, and we can have a rate structure that would allow you to set your car and charge your vehicle at a time when it's cheaper to do so. So we would have variability in the rates, and be able to offer structures that would allow customers to be able to not only control their usage more, but save money in doing so.
Okay, Bob Grotta asks, say, you talk about cost savings programs for consumers. He claims you don't define them. Can you give some very specific examples quickly about some cost saving programs for Rhode Islanders?
Sure. One easy example is the home energy audit and assessment that we can offer for customers, and so they can get a no-cost assessment of their home, and get insulation and other things that will help lower their bills. That's one example. Another example is the reduced rate that certain customers qualify for, and then we have a number of energy efficiency offerings to help customers. We rebates on smart thermostats to allow you to control your temperature remotely if you want to do that, or to set set times to turn it on or turn it off. Those
Sure.
are just some examples of things that we do.
Robert Ryan asks, and we've talked about it a little bit, do you see, because of the mandates of renewables, do you see over time energy prices being pushed upward because of those projects coming online, and your purchasing of those products, of those de facto from those sources?
Um, the short answer is yes, most likely. It's the energy market is a really a difficult thing, and it's particularly difficult for us in New England because of limitations that we have on access to certain pipeline capacity and other things, which ultimately influence the market for energy. But just at a fundamental level, renewable energy currently in the United States is not necessarily the cheapest form of energy. Some forms of it are cheaper. Onshore wind, for example, is cheap, pretty cheap power. Solar is actually at a point now where it's pretty affordable and pretty cheap as well. Offshore wind, just because that industry is still in the early stages, is much more expensive. All of the talk around executive orders and all of that, we're still watching all of that very, very closely to see how that ultimately impacts that offshore wind industry, because until it can get fully established and we can get a lot of the infrastructure and stuff in place, none of which we own, for example. I think you know that, Josh, but
Yeah.
that's all owned by other companies. But until they can get that infrastructure in place, that's not going to ultimately drive down costs. But probably the biggest question I get when I'm out talking to customers and when I'm going around is, why is energy cheaper in North Dakota or in Utah, for example, than it is in Rhode Island? And the short answer to that question is, it's a resource availability issue, and it's a resource mix issue. They are generating energy from different forms that are much cheaper, and they don't have the same policy climate goals that we have here in Rhode Island and really in New England across more broadly. So the difference is, I looked it up this morning actually, the right now the lowest cost of energy in the United States is North Dakota.
Yeah.
Their approved return on equity is almost a full percentage point higher than ours. So they've got the opportunity to earn an even larger profit than we have in Rhode Island. So it's clearly not the profit return on equity component that's driving it. What's driving it is they've got access to, and they're using cheaper forms of energy. They're still burning coal, for example, and clearly those are not climate friendly, but they're cheaper, and they don't have a climate mandate at all in some of those states. So that's just the reality of the pricing structure.
Alex Lavin, business person, says his bill's gone from $17,000 a month to $32,000 a month. What do you say to? I know the business; it's a mid-sized business, and it's 24-hour operational. What do you say? That's I think it's a profitable concern, but you just took 180 grand out of his pocket.
Yeah, no, I understand the concern there. I'm assuming that's been over the, I don't know what period he's comparing. I'm assuming that's been over the winter. We did see the highest demand on our system this winter that we've seen in a decade. So even though it wasn't an extreme winter by any means, it was
Wasn't
much
that cold a
colder than
winter?
I'm sorry?
It was not that cold a winter.
It was not that cold overall, but it was colder than it has been the last 2 years.
Yeah.
So, when folks are comparing, I mean, my memory is more short term. I'm like, gosh, I didn't pay that much last winter. It was warmer last winter. It was warmer the winter before than it was this winter. But you're right, it was not an extreme winter, but it was certainly colder than we've seen in a while. The variability over this winter is I mean, our rates had not changed. Our structure hadn't changed other than supply, which always goes up in the winter in New England. That's just the nature of the market that we're in, unfortunately. So, I pay my bill. I understand that's not, nobody likes those kinds of increases, and I fully get it. But it's been driven over the last few months just by higher rates. The good news though is as you probably saw, our summer supply rate, the rate we were able to procure is much lower, about 17%. So, coupled with warmer temperatures and that drop in supply on April 1st, there's a lot of relief coming that way, and we're working hard with the General Assembly and others to try to find broader solutions to this problem, because it's going to require a shared effort. It's not, unfortunately, we can't. I wish I could just control it myself. I can't. There's very little that I can do, or that we can do as Rhode Island Energy, but we're working to try to be as efficient as we can, and to try to work with policymakers to find some changes here.
Greg, you guys are getting the lion's share of the criticism. You're up there with Peter Alviti and RIDOT as
Yeah.
on the list. We'll just call it the list.
No, I
But
get it.
but here's some realities of the cost of living in Rhode Island. We did a story on Monday. The
Saw
median
that.
price of a single family house in Rhode Island was about $350,000 just 4 years ago. It's now $460,000, and that's a little bit of an aberration because that was the winter numbers. It's closer to $500,000. You change out the interest rates, which were then about 3%. They're now about 7%. I think we calculated a little lower. You add in insurance, you add in energy. Actually, not even including those factors, you're upset. The same house to buy it in Rhode Island, if you're a first-time home buyer, to buy a median-priced home, is 75% more. Then you add in insurance, then you add in energy costs, et cetera. Forget if you want to swap out your kitchen, that's going to be 50% more all day long.
Right.
There is a breaking point. Do you guys, as you think about it, not only in the short term of dealing with this session of the General Assembly, but when you look at this more long term, are you thinking about, listen, there's functionally one pipeline that brings in the natural gas that fuels the vast majority of the production of electricity in this state. Are you looking at alternatives to that? Do we need more pipelines? No, a lot of folks are now coming around and starting to talk about nuclear. Is there a better energy mix that Rhode Island could adopt that would give it some significant savings?
Yeah, really good question, Josh. And so let me start with nuclear if I can, because there are bills both in the Senate and the House this session, which we're supportive of, because I do think they're really good policy for the state. So Senator Decoyan and Representative Solomon and others have sponsored those bills to make clear a pathway for us to participate in what we expect to be an offering from the Millstone plant down in Connecticut, maybe starting as early as later this year, a multi-state RFP process, and we just want a seat at the table for Rhode Islanders, because the only form of baseload energy right now, and by baseload I mean that runs all the time, that's available whenever we need it, 24/7, 365, that is carbon free, is nuclear energy. Natural gas is available 24/7, 365, but it's not carbon free. Coal obviously is the same, but it's definitely not carbon free. So we're looking at that as one potential option. My view is we've got to have a broad sort of all of the above approach, at least in the near term, to try to solve this problem. Bringing in another pipeline is not only politically fraught, I understand that, but it's also factually very challenging for us in New England, because really anything that's going to bring in gas from, for example, additional gas from like Pennsylvania and the Marcellus Shale, where there's just an abundance of gas, has to go through New York, and they've not been very interested in seeing new pipelines go into the ground across their state. But I've seen a lot, in the public dialogue recently from obviously the federal administration, but I've even seen, some indications from Connecticut and from Massachusetts, where their governors are maybe looking at some of those options as well. We're looking constantly at ways that we can try to drive down costs wherever we can. I was on a call yesterday that I initiated with some folks with an interesting new project down in Pennsylvania and in Virginia with some renewable natural gas. So natural gas that is being captured out of the ground that would otherwise be going into the atmosphere. And so
Yeah.
they've got this really interesting technology, and they're trying to sort of get that off the ground. And we were looking at it from, obviously it's got some great climate benefits, but we're looking at it from a cost structure to determine whether that's anything that would be feasible, because there's always that balance. But nuclear is certainly one option. Now, if there were additional pipeline capacity, would prices in New England be lower? I think the clear answer to that is yes. The reality is, one of the big reasons we're in this price situation in New England that we're in now is that we weren't able to expand natural gas access, and so we're paying for it. It's
Yeah.
Simple supply and demand. Like you
And
said, the bulk of generation in New England right now is still natural gas, and so when we don't have easy access to that gas, it costs us more, and the electricity's more as a result.
And the last question I have is, all of us have been tracking sort of what's going on offshore. Ørsted's got a project sort of in the water right now. It is far away from completion. If you read the tea leaves of what's going on at Ørsted as a corporation, a global corporation, their, I'm going to say, willingness to continue to invest in the United States, where the United States, certainly under the Trump policy, does not seem to be very favorable. I'm not saying that project's in jeopardy, although there's certainly questions, but the next project up certainly is in question. They've changed out sort of the team here in the United States. Yeah. They've written off a lot of losses. Do you anticipate, and I asked you to sort of project, could we see them step away from that second project, and really offshore is off the market for the foreseeable 2 to 5 years?
Yeah, I think there's a real risk of that, and the bigger concern and worry I've got is I'm not sure it's just the next 2 to 5 years. I mean, as I said, we were starting to get to a critical mass here of supporting that industry. If you look at the cost structure in Europe, and the cost of offshore wind has dramatically decreased as they've gotten that infrastructure in place. And we were kind of getting to the point where we were getting good momentum in New England. And
could we have the worst of both worlds, where we have a lot of infrastructure cost and not a lot of production because other phases don't move forward?
Yeah, so we're continuing. We've got, as you probably, I'm sure, have seen and know, we're working with Massachusetts right now on a project with South Coast Wind. We're continuing those negotiations. They've written off some losses as well. They've got a European parent, and so they've got their permitting. So we're hoping to see that project continue forward. But the whole industry is in a state of uncertainty, the offshore wind industry right now.
Listen, Greg, I want to thank you for coming on. Hopefully we can do this again. I think it's incredibly important to you as a corporate leader in Rhode Island, a really important part of the state's infrastructure, to come out and talk with folks. I know you're doing it on a one-on-one basis, and we invite you to come back again, and appreciate the honesty and the straightforwardness of answering all the questions. And we'll follow up with some of those individual ones and
Please
coordinate with your
absolutely.
office to make sure that those folks get answers as well. Again, thanks very much.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity.
For everybody else, stay tuned. There is a lot going on across the board. We've got a big story about the City of Providence. The internal auditor broke a report late last week showing a bunch of city employees being paid overtime who are not eligible for overtime, improper payments. Now, one of those employees who received over $18,000 is leaving city service in a couple of weeks, and the mayor's office has little to say about it, so we'll stay on that story. The NCAA portal, we've Greg's a Kentucky fan. We won't get into
Yeah.
that on air, but lots going on there. We'll have updates as we do every day as to what's going on with the 4 schools. And obviously, congratulations to Phil Martilli Jr., who's going down to Virginia Commonwealth, a very fine guy. Obviously, his father's, I believe, a Hall of Famer from St. Joe's. So lots going on. There'll be a vacancy at Bryant. We'll have much, much more. Everybody stay tuned. We'll have updates throughout the day and into the night, and enjoy the spectacular weather today.